Welcome back to Odious, a podcast where we dive into the most mysterious and chilling cases that continue to plague us. Sometimes they're true crime, sometimes they're hauntings, and sometimes they're little green aliens. I'm your host Shauna, and today we're discussing a case that has captivated the world for decades, the tragic murder of JonBenet Ramsey. I will add my usual disclaimer shortly, but just to emphasise, today we will be talking about the abuse and murder of a child, so if you feel like that's not something you can handle, I totally understand. Feel free to dip out, I'll hopefully catch you again. This episode contains sensitive content. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's go right back to the very beginning when JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6th, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, to John and Patsy Ramsey. She had an older brother, Burke, who was around the age of 3 when she was born, and she also had 2 half-siblings that her father had from a previous marriage. When JonBenet was 1 year old, the Ramsey family upped and moved 1,400 miles away to the idyllic and upmarket Boulder area in Colorado. The Ramsey residence is known for being particularly attractive, with grand designs and a picturesque backdrop of the Rocky Mountains surrounding the home. This is a real testament to the wealth held by the family at the time, with the patriarch John serving as the president and CEO of Access Graphics, a computer services company later acquired by the aerospace giant that is Lockheed Martin. In fact, mere days before JonBenet's death in 1996, Access Graphics surpassed $1 billion in revenue. JonBenet's mother Patsy was a fairly prominent Boulder socialite and a homemaker, deeply involved in the community and with charity work. From a very young age, JonBenet was special and unique. She was a very pretty little girl with a gorgeous smile and a passion for performing, qualities that made her a real standout in the world of child beauty pageants. By the time of her death, JonBenet had already won titles such as the Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl and America's Royal Miss. As tends to be the case a lot in the pageant world, JonBenet's involvement was largely driven by her mother Patsy, who was a former beauty queen herself and had won the title of Miss West Virginia in 1977. The child pageant world in particular is estimated to bring in an approximate $5 billion globally each year, and in the United States alone, roughly 250,000 children compete annually. Child pageant stars are overwhelmingly female and can be aged anywhere from 0 months old up to 18 years old. The topic overall is really controversial, and if you've ever seen Toddlers and Tiaras on TLC, you know that it's quite a high-stress environment for competitors with a lot at stake, including finances, future opportunities, and oftentimes almost a family legacy of competing to uphold. The child pageantry world is often criticised for placing far too much emphasis on appearance from a young age. Although this research is over a decade old, in 2011 Dr. Martina Cartwright, a psychologist, discussed a range of truly troublesome impacts that pageantry can have on young girls. She states that quote-unquote princess syndrome can develop, whereby unattainable beauty ideals are internalized by those competing in pageantry, likely due to the hypercritical environment attached to this world. Dr. Cartwright goes on to say that body image issues, eating disorders, and general dissatisfaction with their view of themselves are all potential outcomes of those competing in child pageantry. Despite these points though, JonBenet appeared to really enjoy competing in these competitions, with family members like her father saying the following: JonBenet loved to do it because she loved to perform and sing and dance. Although even he did say he found the pageant world bizarre and kind of slammed the competitive nature of these shows. Outwardly though, it seemed like she really shone in the spotlight of the pageants and was able to capture the hearts of those interested in this world. And it is unfortunate because, and I would like to say right now that I absolutely do not believe that children competing in pageantry is an open invitation for any creepy behaviour to ensue, and they certainly are not asking for it, in air quotes, but it would be remiss of me not to mention that there does exist a much more sinister side to child pageantry, whereby some with dark and twisted intentions revel in watching children like JonBenet perform in such shows. That brings us up to speed on JonBenet's involvement in pageants, as well as the commonly cited critiques of her involvement in them. Nonetheless, on December 17th of 1996, she was crowned Colorado's Little Miss Christmas, and I think she won a Santa Bear as a prize for this, but this is subject to contention. It was quite hard to decipher if she did win it here or not, so that is a bit of a question mark, but remember the Santa Bear for later because it will come back. As the festive season continued on, the Ramseys were preparing for the holidays like any other family would have been at the time. They hosted a Christmas party at their house on December 23rd, which was attended by lots of kids around JonBenet's age and families. We know the children that attended decorated gingerbread houses and were paid a visit from someone dressed up as Santa. We will revisit this later. There is information about the attendee list for this party, so we believe the following people attended that evening: the Ramsey family, of course, Don Poor, Patsy's father, Fleet Sr., Priscilla, Daphne and Fleet White Jr., neighbours and friends of the Ramseys, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, Priscilla White's parents, Cliff Gaston, the boyfriend of Priscilla's sister Alison, in town visiting the White family for Christmas, Bill Cox, the husband of Priscilla's niece Heather, also in town visiting the White family for Christmas, John and Barbara Fernie, friends of the Ramseys and their son and daughter, along with a young boy of around 9 who's friends of the Fernie family, Glenn, Susan and their son Doug Stein, all friends of the Ramseys, Susan Stein's mother, Glenn Stein's mother, the Barber family, friends of the Ramseys, Joe and Betty Barnhill, neighbours of the Ramseys, and their boarder Glenn Mayer, who was not invited but turned up to talk to the Barnhills and ended up staying for a while, Linda Hoffman Pugh, a housekeeper of the Ramseys and her daughter Ariana, and Bill and Janet McReynolds, also friends of the family. So it was a pretty packed party. John Ramsey recalled JonBenet apparently cried at some point during the party because she didn't feel pretty. That's not entirely strange, children cry for a manner of reasons when they're 6 years old. Other than that though, something fairly odd did occur when Fleet White Sr. dialed 911 from the Ramseys' house that evening. Apparently he did this in mistake because he was trying to call to secure or find information about medication for his mother in Aspen. However, I'm not entirely sure how you mistakenly call 911. Obviously I'm not American, but from my research I did find that you could call 411, kind of like a telephone directory service at that time, so I guess that could have been why. Suppose it's quite easy to confuse 4 and 9. Other than that, it seemed like everyone had a good time, and I believe the party ended around 8 that evening. It appears that everyone was really in the festive spirit and looking forward to Christmas that year. However, beneath the surface, some believe that tensions may have been building. The housekeeper for the Ramseys, Linda Hoffman Pugh, has since come out and said that Patsy was reportedly exhausted from the constant demands of the pageant circuit and the holiday season that year. She said that she wouldn't have been surprised if Patsy had quote-unquote multiple personalities because her mood seemed very up and down in the days leading up to Christmas that year. But it is a stressful time of year, and especially when you pride yourself on being a hostess and a socialite, everyone is looking to you for providing their entertainment needs. That sounds stressful enough, but also being a mother to 2 young children who are probably wound up about Christmas, that's bound to add extra stress. But despite the outward appearance of normalcy, these accounts do point to some signs that something was not quite right at this point for Patsy. Whether those rumours were true or not, we can't really say for sure, but regardless, on Christmas Day that year, JonBenet received several gifts, including a bike and a doll, which she excitedly played with on that day. There are some really heartwarming yet kind of eerie pictures of her opening her presents really excited that morning, with nobody knowing that in less than 24 hours everything would change for the Ramseys forever. Later in the evening, the Ramseys visited their friends, the Whites, for a Christmas night party, and later that evening the family drove back to their home and John carried JonBenet into the house as she'd fallen asleep on the short journey back. It's important to note that most of the neighbours didn't report anything out of the ordinary that night, but 2 neighbours did report hearing a scream at some point between midnight and 2 a.m. on December 26th. One of these neighbours did later recount their statement though. Another neighbour reported seeing the kitchen light on, while another reported that the safety light she'd seen outside the Ramsey home for years was not there that night. Later that morning, on December 26th, everything seemed normal. Patsy Ramsey woke up around 5:30 a.m, intended to start the day with the usual post-Christmas activities. I believe that day the Ramseys were due to fly to another state to visit family for the holidays, but as Patsy descended the spiral staircase of this sprawling Boulder home, she noticed something alarming: an apparent 3-page ransom note lying on the steps. The note demanded an oddly specific $118,000 for JonBenet's safe return, a sum that eerily matched the amount of John Ramsey's recent work bonus. Patsy immediately ran to her daughter's room and found her bed empty. She quickly called 911 at 5:45 a.m, reporting her daughter as kidnapped. The ransom note, an unusual piece of evidence in itself, was left behind by the intruder or intruders, but its authenticity was immediately questioned. The note was written using a pad from inside the Ramsey home, and when I say this I don't mean paper was ripped out of it, it was still attached to the pad itself, and the whole thing seemed weird from the get-go, with the general tone just being odd. I think it's also important to note that most genuine ransom notes don't tend to be this long. They're usually far shorter in length. It's also littered with spelling mistakes. It uses kind of irregular vocabulary like attaché, and most ransom notes tend to be pre-written, not just produced on the spur when you're in the environment to kidnap the victim. The note read as follows: Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account, $100,000 $1,000 will be in $100 bills and the remaining $1,800 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us. Be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory, SBTC. It took around 2.5 hours for an investigator to arrive at the Ramsey residence, but police officers Rick French and Carl Veitch arrived roughly 8 minutes after Patsy called 911 at 5:52 a.m, where they conducted a basic cursory search but found no evidence to highlight there being any sign of a break-in. At around 5:55 a.m, John Ramsey makes contact with the Whites and tells them to please hurry over. The White family arrived at about 6:20 a.m. and are not the only friends present. John and Barbara Fernie were also there and helped clean up the house, which is just beyond my comprehension considering you're in an active crime scene. At some point before 7 a.m, Fleet Sr. apparently opened the door to the wine cellar but didn't report seeing anything, although he did not turn the light on. At 7 a.m, the Ramsey's minister, Father Hoverstock, also arrived, I'm guessing for moral and spiritual support. John Fernie and Fleet Sr. woke Burke up shortly after Father Hoverstock arrived, took Burke out of the house, collected the Fernie children, and then left all of the children at the White's house. Detective Linda Arndt was the first investigator on the scene, arriving at about 8 a.m. JonBenét's bedroom was sealed either after Linda Arndt arrives or when the first two officers make it to the scene shortly after Patsy's call. I couldn't really decipher which. It said that this was to preserve evidence, but no other area of the home received the same treatment, which is such a frustrating fact in this case. Regardless of what police thought happened at that point, that home was a crime scene. You have a missing child, you don't know where they are, if they're alive, you have evidence that points to the kidnappers using stationery from the home to produce a ransom note, so you know there's potentially evidence you need to preserve outside of JonBenét's bedroom, and time is really of the essence in this situation. Boulder police absolutely should have sealed the scene off to prevent any further contamination, and that was entirely common sense and one of the golden rules of law enforcement investigation. My bewilderment continues as that afternoon, and this is so wild for me, but instead of calling for backup or evacuating the entire family and their visitors from the house and getting them to stay in a hotel or something, she sent John Ramsey, the victim's father, John Fernie, and Fleet White Sr. to look around the Ramsey house again, themselves, with no police supervision. It's such an illogical and honestly dangerous plan. What if the killer was still inside the house? Unfortunately, the body of JonBenet was found shortly after 1 p.m. that day by her own father. It's not surprising, but John held JonBenet after finding her body and was just in an absolute state of despair, which is exactly why families should not be looking for their own missing loved ones. Not only is it incredibly traumatizing if they're to find something like that, but the natural parental reaction is to embrace your deceased loved one. But this obviously has massive implications on the preservation of any evidence. JonBenet had been brutally strangled with a garrote made from a piece of cord and a broken paintbrush handle, with her official cause of death ruled as asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. There was blunt force trauma found to her skull and 2 small circular electrical burn-like marks on her face and back. She had black duct tape across her mouth, and there were also signs of possible sexual assault. This is really awful, but some sources report that fragments of the wooden paintbrush were found in JonBenet. If this is true, it could be consistent with that object being used to inflict sexual abuse onto her. However, this isn't noted on the autopsy, so I don't think there's a lot of merit to it, but I could be wrong. It's also important to note that no semen was found at the crime scene, but male DNA was found on her underwear, though one of the most popular theories for this is that it's contamination from the manufacturer during packaging of the underwear, as no conclusive matches have been made to this day, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. The garrote used to strangle JonBenet was made from materials found within in the Ramsey home, suggesting that the killer was either someone familiar with the house, or that they had ample time to find the necessary items, or that they lived in the house themselves. The Boulder Police Department's handling of the case was widely criticised, and for good reason. They were ill-equipped to deal with a crime of this magnitude, and many believe that the initial hours after JonBenét's disappearance were mishandled in such a way that crucial evidence was lost or contaminated. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed about who killed JonBenet Ramsey, and the list of suspects is as long as it is controversial. The family were just hounded by the media in the many years following JonBenét's death, but the initial focus was on the family themselves. John, Patsy, and even JonBenét's older brother Burke. There are many who still believe this is where the answer lies, but all members of the family have long been cleared of any involvement in JonBenét's murder. Some investigators believe that Patsy had accidentally killed JonBenet in a fit of rage and then staged the scene to cover it up. JonBenet was apparently going through a phase, like many children do, of wetting the bed, so one of the reasonings behind the theory that Patsy snapped is that she was tired and overrun from the festivities, discovered that her daughter had wet the bed again, and in a fit of rage and in a state of stress, she just snapped. This theory is bolstered by the idea that the ransom note, written on paper from a notepad in the Ramsey home, appeared to be written by someone trying to mimic a kidnapping. It's actually had its roots linked to several films that had come out prior to the murder, which led some to suspect Patsy. Some others have also theorised that Patsy was jealous of JonBenet, and that she was kind of living vicariously through her daughter by enrolling her in these pageants, and that wasn't enough, so she just killed her. Others pointed to John Ramsey, her father, suggesting he might have been involved in a cover-up to protect the family, or some have accused him of abusing JonBenet and killing her to prevent this from becoming known to the rest of the family. Once more though, no merit to these theories, and pure speculation that must have been very hurtful to her family. One of the most controversial but sort of widely accepted theories is that JonBenet's brother Burke, who was 9 years old at the time, may have killed her during a fight or argument, and that the parents then staged the crime scene to protect him because they just lost one child and they didn't want to risk losing another one to incarceration. This theory purports that JonBenet and Burke snuck downstairs Christmas night or early Boxing Day morning to eat some pineapple, as this was found undigested in her stomach, and something happened which upset or angered Burke and led him to picking up a heavy object and hitting JonBenet over the head with it. He then panicked, woke up his parents, and they hid her body to try and make it look like a kidnapping. Another motive is jealousy on Burke's behalf that JonBenet got all the attention, which was hard for him to accept, so he deliberately attacked his sister. In any sense, this theory was partially fueled by Burke's unusual behaviour in later interviews, with many saying that he appears to be smiling during these interviews at times where they're talking about the nature of her death and her funeral, and others also say that at some point during Patsy's 911 call, they can hear Patsy saying to Burke, "What did you do?" But I have to say, I do not hear this at all, and no conclusive evidence has ever supported this claim. Outside the family, there were other potential suspects, including known sex offenders inside and outside the Boulder area, and individuals with potential motives, as well as those that people just found a little odd and potentially could be connected to the crime. One such person is Gary Oliver. Gary Oliver is a convicted sex offender with a history of crimes against children. He was living near the Ramsey home at the time of JonBenet's murder. In 2000, 4 years after the murder, Oliver was arrested for drug charges, and during his arrest, police found a photo of JonBenet in his possession, along with a stun gun. Some theories suggest the stun gun might have been used on JonBenet due to those marks found on her face and back mentioned earlier. In 2019, reports surfaced that Oliver allegedly confessed to killing JonBenet in letters to a high school friend, Michael Vale. However, Oliver's confession was considered dubious by many because of his history of mental illness and inconsistent statements, with many citing that he was kind of known for lying a lot. Despite these factors, no concrete evidence has linked Oliver to JonBenet's murder. His DNA did not match the unknown male DNA found at the crime scene either. The second person of interest was a guy called John Mark Carr, a former school teacher with a very questionable past. He became widely known in 2006 when he falsely confessed to killing JonBenet. Carr was obsessed with the case and had been corresponding with a journalist, leading to his eventual arrest in Thailand. Carr claimed to have been with JonBenet when she died and provided details about the case. However, his story was inconsistent, and crucially, his DNA again did not match the evidence found on JonBenet. It was later revealed that Carr had a fascination with young girls and had been involved in child pornography, so he's clearly not a great guy. Nevertheless, his apparent confession was dismissed as a delusion, and he was never charged in connection with the case. Thirdly, Michael Helgoth was a local Boulder man who worked in a junkyard and was reportedly interested in extreme violence. He was considered a potential suspect after he died by suicide shortly after the district attorney announced they were closing in on a suspect in the Ramsey case. As an aside, I don't think the suspect was actually him. Helgoth allegedly confessed to a friend that he wanted to harm someone gun in the Ramsey household. A stun gun, which as previously mentioned some believe was used on JonBenet, was also found in his possession. Although I think it's important to mention here, the sale and possession of a stun gun was and is completely legal in the state of Colorado, so this is purely circumstantial. Helgoth's death was ruled a suicide, and although his DNA did not match the sample found on JonBenet, some believe his potential involvement has not been fully explored. There is also a theory that I think could be a possibility, that the killer was a disgruntled former employee of John's company Access Graphics. One of the key reasons behind the existence of this theory is the really precise knowledge of that bonus amount cited in the ransom note of $118,000. Many ransom and hostage negotiation experts have said over the years that it's really rare to see amounts asked for in these situations that aren't whole numbers or really big numbers. John Ramsey's worth was around $6 million in 1996. Why wouldn't kidnappers ask for $500,000 or even $1 million? The explicit mention of such a specific amount of money, especially when it ties into John's specific bonus, is really bizarre. There's not too much more to go off outside of this idea. If you recall from earlier when I told you to remember the Santa bear JonBenet had in her possession, and the jury's still out on whether this was a prize or it just appeared out of nowhere, well, some people think this could be a calling card of the murderer. I don't know where this really fits in, but it is frequently mentioned by sleuths. Finally, on the subject of Santa, one of the most cited suspects is the man who played Santa in the Ramsey's Christmas party on the 23rd of December, family friend Bill McReynolds. JonBenet reportedly had a special bond with him and even gave him a vial of glitter, which McReynolds cherished and reportedly asked for it to be mixed in with his ashes when he died. People believe that Bill was kind of infatuated with JonBenet and theorized that he maybe was able to lure her away from her bedroom because they had a good relationship. However, I want to make it very clear, Bill has been ruled out multiple times and there is zero solid evidence to link him to the crime, yet he's still seemingly being named as a top suspect by some interested in the case. Another point that many bring up is that Bill's wife Janet wrote a play years prior to JonBenet's murder about a young girl who was molested and murdered in her basement, leading some to draw some really eerie parallels to JonBenet's murder case. Additionally, McReynolds allegedly told JonBenet that she would receive a special gift after Christmas, which some have speculated could be related to the crime, but again, no evidence to support this. Bill had heart surgery shortly after JonBenet's death and passed away in 2002. He was considered by some to be a suspect due to his odd behaviour and the supposed special relationship he had with JonBenet, but there was no concrete evidence, again, linking him to the crime. McReynolds had a solid alibi for the night of the murder, and despite being questioned by police, he was never charged. His DNA also didn't match the unknown male DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. No charges were ever filed in this case, and it remains officially unsolved. For me personally, I don't think any of these people of interest are actually behind the murder of JonBenet. I genuinely have no idea who committed this murder, and as sad as it is to say, I'm not convinced it will ever be solved. In my opinion, the police have a lot to answer for when it comes to this, due to the horrendous way the investigation was handled, or mishandled rather, by them. For all we know, the real murderer could have been somebody already interviewed by police, and because evidence around the crime scene was at so much risk of degradation, it couldn't be properly analysed the same way a properly preserved scene would have allowed, or they may have even misplaced evidence like we said earlier. I'm not saying this is a surefire conclusion, but the shoddy practice conducted by the BPD really doesn't instill much faith in their ability to effectively handle this case. Moving on, despite the tragic circumstances of her death, JonBenet Ramsey's legacy has inspired various charitable efforts over the years. In the many years following her death, the Ramseys established the JonBenet Ramsey Children's Foundation, which was aimed at supporting child advocacy and protecting children from any harm. The foundation focused on preventing child abuse and supporting victims' rights. Unfortunately, the foundation was disbanded in 2006, shortly after Patsy Ramsey passed away from ovarian cancer, and she was only 49 when she died. She was interred next to JonBenet in Georgia. John Ramsey has since remarried and has remained largely out of the public eye, which makes sense, but the case continues to be a source of deep pain and controversy for the family. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey remains one of the most famous and perplexing cold cases in American history. The mix of wealth, beauty, mystery, and the harrowing death of such a young girl with all her life ahead of her has kept it in the public eye for nearly 3 decades, and I think it should remain there. But the truth of what happened on that fateful Christmas night in 1996 continues to elude us. As we wrap up this episode, we're left with more questions than answers. Was it an intruder who somehow evaded detection in the Ramsey home, or was it someone within the house, as many have speculated over the years? Until any new evidence comes to light or a confession is made, the mystery of JonBenet Ramsey's death will remain unsolved, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can exist behind closed doors. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Odious. If you have any thoughts about the case, I would love to hear them. You can reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is @OdiousPod, or you can leave a comment under this video if you're listening on YouTube. I'll be back again next week at the same time, where we will be covering the shock and murder of Jill Dando. But until then, stay sharp and stay safe.